Welcome to Justice Matters. I'm Denise George, Attorney General of the U.S. Virgin Islands. Justice Matters is a program aimed to inform, engage, and empower you with knowledge of Virgin Islands laws that affect our everyday lives and our community. Today's topic is antitrust and the generic drugs market. Many Virgin Islands consumers choose generic prescription drugs as a less expensive and reasonably priced option to prescription name brand medications. But what happens if that option is threatened by the very same generic drug manufacturers that may be driving up the prices? On behalf of the U.S. Virgin Islands, I joined a coalition of attorneys general of 51 states and territories, led by Connecticut, in filing a lawsuit stemming from an ongoing antitrust investigation into widespread conspiracies by certain drug manufacturers to artificially inflate, fix, and manipulate prices, reduce competition, and unreasonably restrain trade for generic drugs sold across the United States, including the Virgin Islands. You probably have heard the word a lot, but what is antitrust, and why is it so important to the rights and protections of consumers? Well, antitrust is a group of laws established to regulate business practices in order to ensure that fair competition happens in an open market economy for the benefit of consumers. Our Virgin Islands lawsuit alleges that the practices by these defendants violate both the Virgin Islands Anti-Monopolies and Restraints of Trade Act and the Consumer Fraud and Deceptive Business Practices Act. Under our local antitrust laws, it is unlawful for any person to engage in unfair methods of competition or unfair or deceptive trade acts or practices in the conduct of any trade or commerce. And the Anti-Monopoly Act prohibits anyone by contract, combination, or conspiracy with one or more persons to decrease competition or unreasonably restrain trade or commerce. VI law empowers the Attorney General to take civil action to prevent and restrain violations of these deceptive practices and to seek civil penalties and other relief to stop those practices from going on and to protect our consumers. Why is this important? It is important because every person should be aware of their rights as consumers, and every consumer deserves access to the medication they need at prices they can afford. As we are aware, generic drugs are designed to lower cost options to non-generic high prescription drug prices. If drug manufacturers can secretly work together to raise the prices until they are no longer affordable, it defeats the overall purpose for that option. Joining us today on Justice Matters is Assistant Attorney General Michael Francisco, who is the assigned attorney to the coalition representing the Virgin Islands in this consumer protection action. The action is still ongoing, so we will discuss the matters that's already in the public purview. Welcome to Justice Matters, Attorney Francisco.
Thank you.
Good. Now, tell us about this case, about the generics case. What exactly is it about?
Department of Justice, in its enforcement capacity, is pursuing antitrust violations as well as violations under the Consumer Protection Law, Consumer Fraud and Deceptive Business Practices Act, for what we allege to be an overarching conspiracy among generic drug manufacturers to artificially inflate and manipulate the prices within the generic drug market.
Okay, now when we do that, when we file the suit, what are we actually alleging with respect to what they did, what their deceptive practices are?
Well, in this case, we're alleging that they have engaged in a market allocation scheme that involves chopping up the generic drug market to allow each competitor to have a quote unquote fair share of the market. That essentially allowed each other to prevent price erosion within their own market.
Okay, well, let's go with these words. What's price erosion?
Price erosion is it's the erosion of a price because you don't have competition within the market. If there's only one manufacturer of a good or a commodity and all consumers can only go to that one manufacturer, then there's no competition and it results in higher prices. And generally, it also includes reduced innovation within the market.
So how does it do that? How does that work when you're dealing with price fixing and this way of reducing the competition? How does it work?
Well, it involves collusion among competitors. Typically, we all think of competitors as vying for each other's business. But when you have competitors agree that they won't go after each other's business, it allows each other to create their own little kingdom monopoly. So as I mentioned, we were pursuing antitrust violations. That involves our anti-monopoly laws. But also because the results of these collusive efforts harms consumers and deceives them as to what the true price of these goods should be, we're pursuing violations under the Consumer Fraud and Deceptive Business Practices Act.
Okay, now going straight to the nitty-gritty of the case, of our complaint. What are we alleging? What is the government of the Virgin Islands alleging was done that is deceptive with respect to these companies and these defendants?
Well, they were engaging in communications between competitors that is not allowed. Per se violations. You're not supposed to talk to your competitor about setting prices, allocating markets, bid rigging. So those are some of the typical schemes that competitors will engage in so that they can create an artificially high price.
And how does that happen, though? How just by them talking with each other, setting the price or agreeing on keeping a certain price? Walk us through on how that works. Apart from exactly what they did, but how does that work with respect to resulting in the consumer being negatively impacted?
Well, the consumer as the end user is paying a price for a good that involves or includes, costs along the supply chain. So you have the manufacturer of the good. You also have wholesale distributors. You have retail sales folks, and then you have consumers. And at each level, certain costs are included in the price that eventually makes it to the consumer. If any competitor within the various levels decides to collude with their competitors, then they can, artificially, inflate the price. It's not as easy to nail down. But
let's say a company then says, okay, I'm going to charge $80 a pill for a particular generic drug. And they get with the other competitor, their competitor, and say, let's agree on $80 a pill.
Right.
Okay. And then they all agree on that. Then what happens to the consumer and that market? How does it affect that? Because what is it that affects the consumer's ability to engage in, maybe even getting the best price? Is that where it goes?
Well, generally, when companies or competitors engage in price fixing, their goal is to maintain a higher price than they would otherwise be allowed to charge based on competition with with other players in the market. So, for instance, if you have, as you said, a commodity that was worth $80, if there are two competitors within the market, price being a very important aspect of any good, customers are going to try and play one competitor off the other and get quotes and try to achieve the lowest possible price for them. And each competitor is going to take into account what their costs going into the product are and what margin or profit they want to make or can can stand to make. And hopefully at the end of a truly competitive market, the best competitor wins the business. Mm-hmm. But when you have collusion in between competitors, some competitors will decide they won't give a price to one of the customers of their competitor, and that competitor can charge whatever they like. And mm-hmm. then, at the end of the day, instead of paying, say, $40 for a good, they might pay $80 or $100 or even more.
Mm-hmm. And once you have that too, then what happens is that the consumers then go to the market, and in this particular cases, the generic drugs. And the problem that really manifested was that the generic drugs, or the prices of the generic drugs, just went sky high.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. What exactly are the local violations of law that we are alleging, since we have filed a local lawsuit?
Right. Well, each of the generic drug manufacturers has a drug that is currently being sold in the Virgin Islands. Mm-hmm. And the price of that drug, we allege, is higher than it should be. It's higher than it would be if there was actual competition in the market. Unfortunately, we believe that these competitors have entered into agreements to allocate the market, allowing each competitor to maintain their own quote-unquote fair share. And that is in an effort to reduce price erosion for their good. So mm-hmm. instead of having to compete for business, they are assured that they are going to be the only manufacturer for their clients, as their competitors will be the only manufacturers for their clients. No one's going to compete for business. And collectively, they will raise the price on everyone. Mm-hmm. And eventually that works its way down to the customer, the end user of the product, who should be getting the benefit of competition. Mm-hmm. As in our capitalistic society, the normal laws of supply and demand mm-hmm. are intended to create.
Especially since they're generics, because normally people use generics or purchase generics because it's normally a lower price than the brand name items. So this is even among generics, right? We saw that the prices were extremely high for our consumers as well.
Yes, it's exactly the opposite of how the market should work.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of products, what kind of pharmaceuticals and products and drugs are we talking about?
Well, in the complaint that we've joined in a coalition of 51 states mm-hmm. and U.S. territories, there are 80 different topical drugs. There was a press release that listed all 80, so Virgin Island consumers can see if they use any of these products and have been affected by these violations.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now, and why is it that these practices are often considered unfair, harmful, or fraudulent in violation of our Deceptive Practices Act?
Well, as I said before, the normal laws of supply and demand mm-hmm. are intended to govern our economy. Mm-hmm. That includes multiple competitors in any given industry. The U.S. government has laws against monopolies, as does the Virgin Islands. Mm-hmm. In fact, the Department of Justice itself is pursuing claims against these same manufacturers for the exact same conduct. But it disrupts the competitive nature of our economy, and it's a really very serious and insidious practice that, mm-hmm. Especially within such an important industry, generic drugs, a mm-hmm. healthcare essential, mm-hmm. To raise prices on everyday users of generic drugs needs to be addressed.
And is it that I think that mostly as consumers we expect that when we're looking for prices, we normally feel that we're getting either the best price, or we try to get the best price, and we look around the market, we compare prices. But what happens when it is that the companies are agreeing on certain high prices and there's nowhere to go for competition? It seems like the only people who lose are the consumers. Right?
Yes, and within the industry, only a few competitors may compete for a single drug. Mm-hmm. So one drug may only be manufactured by 2 or 3 competitors. Mm-hmm. And if those competitors agree not to compete with each other and instead choose to raise their prices astronomically in some cases, mm-hmm. those increases are passed all the way down to the consumer.
And there's nowhere for the consumer to go when they see the high price here. There's nowhere for them to go to get a lower price.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. What kind of relief is it that the government of the Virgin Islands that we are seeking with respect to this with respect to this lawsuit, with respect to the generics?
Well, we are, along with our counterparts, seeking injunctive relief, civil penalties, and other equitable and legal forms of relief. In many cases, we want to prevent this conduct from occurring in the future.
And that's the injunctive relief.
That's the injunctive relief.
To ask the court to stop it from happening.
Yes, and there are several ways to address that. It can involve monitors within the company. It can involve, it just safeguards to prevent competitor communications.
And tell us about that collaboration with attorneys general, offices throughout the United States who are participating in this. How does that collaboration work with respect to pursuing this case?
Thankfully, our partners in the various other states are very well versed in antitrust as well as consumer protection laws, and there is some continuity between our laws and theirs. So we lean heavily on the other states and the attorneys within those departments of justice to prosecute various areas within this action. It's a very large case. There's a lot of 26 corporate defendants, 10 individual defendants. So there also are a lot of other plaintiffs involved, wholesalers who purchase the drugs and then pass them on to retailers, the retailers like pharmacies, and then the end consumers. So there are a lot of different avenues to negotiate, and thankfully, we have nearly every state and territory involved, so we can divvy out the various responsibilities. The Virgin Islands has taken a lead in various offensive discovery tasks to make sure that we're, carrying our weight and moving the action along.
What is the benefit do you see with respect to our office in representing the government of the Virgin Islands in joining in these larger lawsuits, such as this generics lawsuit, extremely large and complex? What is the benefit of our being able to join in with something like that rather than doing it alone ourselves?
Well, the obvious benefit is we get to lean on our partners for various tasks that need to be done, but also, it shows the defendants that we're not going to sit passively and allow for these violations to occur. We're going to actively vindicate our rights and enforce our laws. And if you come to the Virgin Islands and you break the law, we're going to see that you, are held accountable.
And mainly, as was indicated before, that this is a part of our Consumer Protection Act. So we are protecting or taking action for the protection of our consumers. So how do these types of actions protect our consumers?
Well, at the end of the day, we hope that they will lower prices. Generic drugs are essential healthcare tools, and the more you have to pay for it, the less money you have for other potentially essential goods and services that you may also need. So if at the end of the day we can lower the price of generic drugs, that would be fantastic. Also, the civil penalties that we're seeking, the legislature has created a general fund that money would then go into that could benefit the Virgin Islands in a number of different ways.
So what are the penalties associated with the violations of our local laws?
Well, from a civil penalty standpoint, someone who violates either the anti-monopoly law or the Consumer Fraud and Deceptive Business Practices Act could face a civil penalty up to $50,000 per violation. Now, there's some debate as to whether each sale of a good is a violation unto itself.
I would say so. I would want that interpretation for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. But also they jeopardize their ability to engage and conduct business in the Virgin Islands. Companies have to abide by our rules and laws, and if they're found to have violated them, they may not be allowed to do business here.
So that could be another remedy or another sanction or penalty for violation of our laws as well.
We can seek equitable relief, for instance, disgorgement, which would be the companies having to divest themselves of any ill-gotten gains from these illegal schemes. So if, for instance, they were charging $20 more than they should have for a drug, they would have to give back that $20.
So that's another example of some of the remedies then that we can seek with respect to that.
Yes, that's an equitable remedy, yes.
And it'll be an equitable remedy, right? So what are we talking about then? We're talking about damages, equitable relief, we know what that is, the disgorgement and everything. But what about the money? What about that? About how much are we talking about?
Well, that could be up for debate, but we're talking about 80 topical drugs and a relevant time period of about 4 years. So you would look at the defendant's sales over the course of those 4 years, and this is going to rely on expert testimony and evidence. But the 80 drugs themselves account for billions of dollars in sales for these companies. Now, what portion of that are ill-gotten is left to be determined, but this is certainly a very large case and potential windfall in the billions.
And at this point in time, as with I always want to mention for the sake of the public, with respect to this pending litigation, I mean, we're going through the process of discovery and getting all of the information. So it's never really clear and sure what it is that would be the result. But at least like all the kind of things that are at stake at this point in time.
Yeah, and it's been going on for a while, but hopefully discovery will end soon, and then we can move along to the next stage and put a close or an end to this litigation.
What exactly is antitrust? Like we talk about it, we use the term a lot, as we always do, but what is it? And that just generally, you say antitrust laws.
Antitrust, in a general sense, is the prevention of a monopoly within an industry of the economy. So what a lot of people are maybe most familiar with is Microsoft. At one time, they had a monopoly essentially on internet, that technology, computers, and the federal government broke the company up because it was able to, set its own price. It set the market.
Totally control the market, right?
Totally controlled the market. Also, the AT&T at one point, I know, it was broken up because there were several different carriers within AT&T, but they owned every single telephone operator in the country. And that resulted in higher prices than we would have if there were competition in the market. And in our capitalistic economy, we want competition. Competition drives prices down, and it incentivizes innovation. So if you have a market that is not competitive, it reduces innovation and it increases prices for everybody.
There are about 60 drugs that we've named in the complaint that are subject to the price fixing and the price allocations and everything. So give me an example of just a few of them.
Well, nystatin, ammonium lactate, hydrocortisone, which most people I think would know, promethazine, and several others, lidocaine.
Many others, 60, and some of them that are tough to pronounce, but they are definitely items or drugs that are used by people, consumers here.
Yes, and a list was included on the press release.
We came in pretty much on the third lawsuit.
Correct.
But there were suits going on prior to that, and then we joined in this particular one. What's the difference in as far as where we are at in this particular one that we're working with?
The third complaint in this set of actions, the one that we have joined, is much more wide-ranging, involves 80 different topical generic drugs, as we mentioned, instead of being focused on individual defendants. So this involves 26 defendants. The first and second action involved a single defendant. And we are not a part of those actions, but we've joined in the third action, and we're seeking to enforce our laws in it.
And that's pretty much one of it's actually the larger of all three actions as well. Right?
Yeah. And several of the defendants have actually admitted to engaging in this activity. there are negotiations occurring with individual defendants, and we are certainly willing to talk with defendants and find out what their explanation may be for various communications. But it seems very clear that these defendants were engaging in violative conduct, and that can be seen by looking at the market itself. Mm-hmm. The prices, as you previously said, rose astronomically, and in many cases overnight.
And that's pretty much what prompted the lawsuits in the first place.
Exactly.
I think consumers were noticing that, wait a minute, these generic prices are really, going sky high, and that prompted an investigation. And that's just historically how that happened, so.
Right.
Yeah. So sometimes we have to take action just to address a situation, a problem that we see.
And I would say that the actions that we are alleging defendants engaged in took place many, many years ago. Mm-hmm. But part of their action was to conceal their efforts to fix the market. Mm-hmm. No one's going to tell you that they're engaging in illegal conduct. You have to investigate mm-hmm. and compile evidence and really put in a lot of effort and time to make the charges stick. But thankfully, there is a lot of discovery that's already taken place that shows exactly what conduct the defendants were engaged in, and they tie in directly with the allegations in our complaint.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, so what's next? We continue, huh?
We continue. Yep, mm-hmm. We're hoping to end discovery sometime in 2023, mm-hmm. The early part of 2023, and at the next stage, we will engage with the court to try and resolve these issues.
Okay, good. Yes, and the court, of course, makes the final decision unless there's settlement.
Yes.
So how long have you been with the Attorney General's office fighting for our consumer, the protections of the consumer?
Well, I have been with the Virgin Islands Department of Justice since February of 2021. Mm-hmm. And but I was pulled onto the generics case a little more recently in November or so of 2021.
Okay. And since then, how has it been in working with the generics case?
It's been fantastic. I really enjoy the opportunity to make a difference. That's why I got into government in the first place. And I really can't imagine a more important case to work on, because it has direct and impact on the citizenry. And as I said before, generic drugs are such an important healthcare tool that it makes me feel good to fight to make sure that companies don't artificially inflate their prices and make it harder for everybody.
Mm-hmm. And take advantage of consumers. Thank you so much for the work that you do in protecting consumers here at the Attorney General's office. And welcome and thank you very much for joining us on Justice Matters.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
And thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Justice Matters.